I'm really glad to be here. I've been following the biodiversity conversations for probably past 20 to 30 years. When the conventions were signed and originally signed, and those biodiversity conventions started mentioning indigenous peoples around the world, we all went, yes, finally they understand. And there were a number of different documents that came out, and the one that I liked the best was this one, which was between the spice of life and the melting pot, biodiversity, conservation, and its impact on indigenous people. And I hate to stand here right now and tell you that when you read this, it says, here's a whole bunch of things we should do, and we haven't done them. So the problem is that all of the good things that were done came out of the Biodiversity Convention for us at the international level seem to be just floored off into the nations. And when the nations got it, they said, oh, well, we are not going to be able to do that because that would really disrupt the economies and everything around us. The other thing that happened at the same time was that there was a whole bunch of people that saw that this might be an opportunity for us to work together. And so we started getting people coming to the community saying, oh, we'd love to work with you, but we have no money. And so, but we'd like to build the world. And you go, well, yeah, that's going to be tough. And as Native people, you know, you don't want to send these people away, but it's hard to entertain 1,000 people, you know, on four loaves of bread. You know, you just can't do it. The Department of the Environment started about 40 years ago now. And we actually started the Department of Environment before there was an EPA in the United States or Environment Canada in Canada. And it's interesting to me that when the Grand Council of the Haudenosaunee was asked, should we have an organization in which we can pull all of our nations together to discuss environmental issues, biodiversity, species at risk, and all of those things, it took that Grand Council, the Sacred Circle of 50 Chiefs, about 20 minutes. And they said, yeah, we should do that. To give you an example of how long it takes other decisions to go, I know this one for sure, National Geographic asked the council too if they could take pictures in the Longhouse, because they were doing an article on the Haudenosaunee. I think there was about 2 or 3 on the Haudenosaunee. And so they asked, can we photograph in the Longhouse? A year and a half later went by as they met every time discussing everything that had to be discussed about it. And in the end, after a year and a half, they said, yes, you could photograph in the Longhouse, but you can't use a flash. Now, far be it above my thinking all of the things that they had to consider. But if you heard the opening today, that opening is all of the things that they have to consider. They have to go through their relationship with their own people and who's there. They have to go through the relationship with the earth. You know, how do you make film? How do you do those things? What are the things that are necessary? How do you mine those things? Who's getting gouged? Who should we be trying to protect? And so the Grand Council discussed all of these things from the earth and the people themselves up to the stars. And after that year, they said, okay, here's what you could do. What's so interesting to me is it only took 20 minutes for those same men to go through that huge list of things to say, yes, we need a place where our scientists and our researchers can come together in order to understand the world around us. I find that just phenomenal. If that little decision took so long, you would think that this big one would take even longer. No. Why? Because we knew the environment. We knew all of those things and what the impacts would be. We knew our people. And so we had the confidence to be able to build that. Myself, I would say is that when the time came for them to choose the people, the chairs of that committee or that council, what happened was that they came to me and said, we have a little bit of a task for you to do. And I can remember thinking to myself, no problem, I can do a little task. And finally, the person said, yes, we'd like you to be the scientific co-chair of the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force. And I looked at the person and I said, how long will I be that co-chair? And she sort of scratched her head and she said, when are you planning on dying? And suddenly I realized what our chiefs feel when they're asked by our people to carry out a function or a duty. They saw that duty as being, as long as I could fulfill my duty to that committee and to that work, then I was doing what I was supposed to do. That's a heck of a lot different from the Minister of the Environment in Canada or the United States. I'll be there until my hair goes even grayer than it is today. Oren Lyons was asked the same questions. And so he is the political co-chair of the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force, and we watch over all of the activities. Peggy is here today, and she's one of the people who was invited to the table as one of the Mohawk representatives. Each person that comes to that table must have the credentials given to it by their nation. And their nation then says that they can attend and take part in the discussions that we do. And don't worry, the discussions are wide-ranging about everything that you can think of. And we meet as often as we can, but like many other nations of Aboriginal and Indigenous people, we don't have the money for big travel, so everybody crams into cars and buses and we go down and we do what we can. So when the biodiversity and the sections came up, a lot of our people, when we looked at those, we said, why are we looking at the biodiversity for? Our people, through the Thanksgiving address, we know all of the things we have to take care of. Everybody knows that. It's like, what is it, a Homer Simpson's duh moment, like everyone knows what you have to take care of. And again, our people said, how do we do that though in this world that's here? And so there have been a number of activities that have gone across the country, but also across the world. And some of those are going to be very disruptive to the societies in which we live. So for example, one of the tasks that we looked at with the environment, sounds funny for the environmental assessment or environmental people to look at, was on the Doctrine of Discovery. The Doctrine of Discovery was a papal bull. It was issued in 1300s, 1400s, sometime back there. But what it said that if you were a Christian explorer and you walked upon the land and you saw no Christians before you, then you could claim that land for the church. That was the reason why the Crusades you could carry out, because when they went into Palestine and Jerusalem and they looked, they saw Jewish people, they saw Muslims, they didn't see any Christians, and so they claimed the land. Well, that caused the Crusades and all of the battles that went on. And when they came to North America, they looked upon the land, they saw all these thriving people there, but they saw no Christians. And so they said, we own all this land now. And the last time that the United States government used the Doctrine of Discovery in their law arguments was 1973. And in Canada, they used that same Doctrine of Discovery up until 1980s and are still using it today in some of the land claim type of things. So that Doctrine of Discovery really was the one in which they said, we can seize these lands because no one lives on them. In North and South America, that had huge effects, and with us as well, but it also had ramifications all over the world as this doctrine was applied. Recently, the Anglican Church and many of the churches have renounced the Doctrine of Discovery, saying that it no longer applies. The Roman Catholic Church, because it's a papal bull, and the papal bull, the Pope is infallible, can't sort of just set it aside. And what they've done is they've said, how did they put it? Something like, we might have been remiss in giving this papal bull. So for the time being, we're going to set it over here so that we can look at it in more depth. Their problem is, if they renounce that papal bull, then Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, all of those countries, the very underpinnings of how they own those countries disappears. And so right now, in Canada and the United States, you see a lot of this activity is, how do we negotiate and have partnerships with Native people? They're not coming to us out of the goodness of their hearts. They're coming to us because they suddenly realize that if this underpinning of their land is destroyed and gone, it reverts back to the original owners. Wow. I don't want Manhattan. I want to tear that down and put in a cornfield there, but it's very tempting. There are areas in this country that I would instantly save. And what's so interesting about that is that in Canada and the United States, if you look at the national parks, in Canada, these huge parks, we're just about up to the 12%. The majority of acres and hectares set aside for national parks have been set aside because Native people want them set aside. They want them protected. The single largest park in Canada was set up because the Cree and the Inuit have said, this land we want to remain sacred. And the government said, okay, we'll put it aside. Well, we usually don't allow hunting in it. Oh, this one you will. We don't take many animals. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to use our ways of managing that land, and here's how we're going to do it. And so far, they've been doing an excellent job of managing caribou herds and things that have been in those park areas. The smallest national park in Canada is the St. Lawrence Islands National Park. Tiny little park. It's got like 4 islands in it. This botanical garden is almost big as it is, excluding the water. But that park, they say, wasn't the first. I say it's the first because in the 1800s, the settlers in the area, who were United Empire Loyalists and knew the Mohawk people, were getting scared, and so were the Mohawks, because people were moving onto those islands and squatting on them, and then saying, we own the island. Well, you don't own the island. You can't just squat on it and get squatters' rights for lands that don't belong to you in the first place. So what happened was that the settlers, the United Empire Loyalists and people like that, got together and they petitioned the government, the Canadian government and the British Crown, to set aside those islands in the St. Lawrence River in that area as park reserve. So they're playing with words when they say that it wasn't a national park, but it was the first park reserve declared by Canada way before Banff was. And so what you find in Canada is that most of those areas that you see as national parks were sacred areas of our people. So why are they unique? Well, the St. Lawrence Islands National Park, even though it's so small, has something like 13 to 15 different ecosystems in that area. If you were to go there as an anthropologist and look for villages in this huge area, you would find none. Why? And everybody said, well, why? Didn't your people live there? Or didn't your people go there? No, this place was sacred to our people. And sacred not only to the Haudenosaunee, but to the Anishinaabe and to the Oji-Cree and to the Cree people. This area was an area in which our medicine people could come, and they had all this vast array of different ecosystems where they could harvest the plants and animals that they needed for medicines and purification and the ceremonies that needed to be done. So when you get to the edge of this area, you would stop. You would wash yourself and clean yourself, smudge yourself before you walked into the sacred land in order to collect those medicines. So why would you find a village in there? It would be like building an outhouse in the middle of a cathedral, and in this place. It's just unheard of. Well, to our people, it was unheard of too, to desecrate that area by walking on it in a manner that wasn't respectful to it. And interesting, in the United States, the Geyser Place, all of these different parks that you have in the US, every one of those are sacred areas of Native people. And I always say that I think the creator, whoever she was looking down and said, let's tell them down there that those should be parks because they're so beautiful, and we'll put them aside. But my people, our people, the Haudenosaunee, the Paiutes, all of the people that live around, know that they're sacred. And so that they'll help keep and help protect them. So biodiversity, the protection of that habitat, was important to our people because those areas that were so diverse and so beautiful, they were looked on as those sacred areas in which we'd keep. As we worked with this, you come to a place where the government suddenly go, you know, some species are disappearing. We have to have an act, something that will protect them. And so in the United States, you have Species at Risk Acts. In the states, you have them. In Canada, we have the Species at Risk Act. And the provinces have them. And everybody's out there looking across the land to protect species at risk. Our people at Akwesasne are going, wow, it's about time they learn something. In Akwesasne, we have something like probably close to 50 species at risk. Right at the moment, we're doing a species at risk program, which we easily confirmed about 27 different species. So we found them in this little limited area, and with not very much search effort so far. But we're doing more, and of course we're involving our people, telling our kids that if you see something strange, phone us. And so they start to phone us as well. The best people to find things out on the land are the little kids. When I was small, I used to run all over the place, and I knew where everything in my community was. And I would bring that home and discuss that with my grandmother and grandfather, what they were, and they would tell me how those things were there. I'll give you a really a funny type of story. In our society, the eastern box turtle is used by women in water ceremony because it gives a certain noise when you shake that rattle, and that represents the water around you. And so our people maintained and kept. Women took those turtles, brought them all over North America that they could think of, and as the Haudenosaunee moved north, we brought them with us, and they plunked them down anywhere they could and kept those turtles, went and fed them, made sure that they were healthy and happy in the areas that they were, and those box turtles existed. Just so happens that box turtles are also really quite important to the pet trade. People seem to like box turtles, and so here was a turtle that you could keep it in your backyard, and it would wander around eating your grass and flowers and things like that, and looked really neat to have a turtle of that type. And they lived quite long, so you could have this turtle, you know, for quite a while. So now comes species at risk. And remember, these are a whole bunch of scientists sitting around, and they went, box turtle. These box turtles, how long have they been in Canada? And so they looked and they looked and they said, oh, well, we haven't got very many records of these box turtles being in Canada. The problem is that most of these scientists that were sitting there were biologists. I'm a biologist too, so I have to take some blame. Were biologists. They weren't anthropologists. And what you find is when you talk to the anthropologists, they say, oh my God, you go to any of the villages that were along the St. Lawrence River, and you look in the middens, which were their garbage dumps where they threw stuff out, you find box turtle shells, or you find box turtle remnants, because they were eaten and they were used for ceremony and they had many different reasons. Oh yeah, box turtles were all over the place in this area. Well, the biologist didn't hear what the archaeologists said, and right now, box turtle is rated as expedited from Ontario and from Canada, but I can take you to Kagnawake, to Gunnesedage, to Akwesasne, probably Tyendinaga, Six Nations, and I can show you box turtles living on the land. And so when we got that information into those scientists, they said, oh, well, they must have come from the pet trade. So right now, we have a small project going on in which we're doing what are known as genetic markers of the box turtles, because all of these box turtles actually come from North and South Carolina, way, 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 way back before the ice. but were moved by Haudenosaunee people north, not people, women, and were kept in the community by those women because they needed them. So are box turtles part of the biodiversity of Canada? I would say, yeah. The scientists are having a hard time with that. And it's even though those same people, Kosiwik, has Aboriginal subcommittee on traditional knowledge. In the Act, it's one of the few acts in Canada where Native people are specifically mentioned and specifically put into the Act in order to add our traditional knowledge to the status of animals in Canada. In the US, we're solicited for information on the United States through various different channels, but again, we run into these funny issues where the scientist says one thing and we say something different. I don't know whether I'm the first person to notice it, but as a biologist, when I see, we'll say, a species like Carna blue, which is a little wee butterfly, found only around Chatham and Niagara Falls and in that area, first thing I do is I say, oh, we got to take a look up in Akwesasne while they're there. And everybody goes, why? Why would you do that? Well, when you look at the range map for Carna blue, you see that it's down here way in southern Ontario, but the range goes south of the Great Lakes, quite a ways south, and then comes back up. And where does it hit? Right at Akwesasne. And so Carna blue, when I first arrived in Akwesasne about 40 years ago, I am sure that I saw Carna blue because I saw them in Six Nations, but when I got here, I saw them as well. So, but are they still there? Well, I haven't seen them for a long time, so maybe we have to start looking for them as well. But it would be interesting to see how we reintroduce them. How do we bring them back into the area? And this gets to another thing on biodiversity that when I looked in this book, they didn't think about. As Native people, we love moving things, you know? I just love moving things, you know? We'd move our houses, we'd move this, we'd move that. And we did it in very strategic manners. So you can imagine there's a Proto-Iroquoian Haudenosaunee person, sometime placed around North and South Carolina, and he picks up a nut, this nice big green nut, and he looks at it, he cracks it. He sees all the squirrels eating them like crazy, and he takes out a pick and he eats it, and he goes, wow, this is a cool nut. Well, it's a butternut. And he also found black walnuts the same way. So they went, wow, these are really good. How do you plant those? Well, they watch the squirrels. And they see the squirrel take this nut, and he starts gnawing on it, and he can't get through it, so he puts it in the ground to let it break down a bit before you can open it. And of course, the squirrel walks away and forgets it. Next year, you notice that there's a little tree growing there. Well, he just striated that, a proper seed manipulation in order to make that seed grow. Some of them need acid, some of them need roughing up. But that squirrel showed us how to do this. I don't know, maybe he was a botanist at one time too. And so we watched them, and we started growing butternuts. And if you have a village that has 2 or 3 or 20,000, 60,000 people in it, you need a lot of butternuts. And so you covered as much land as you could with those. Interesting, as we move north, we think over about 1,000 to 2,000 years, every time we moved, we would plant butternuts again. And you know, some of them would grow, some of them wouldn't, but the ones that grew, we then spread. And then we would move north again, and we'd take the butternuts with us again, and we continuously did that for butternuts, hickory, sycamore, and a number of different trees. And we kept moving them north until we couldn't move them north anymore. Well, why? Well, because the people in the north were Cree people, and they came to us and they saw us, and we traded back and forth, and they said, what's that thing you're eating there? Anishinaabe did that, and they went, oh, this is a butternut, and they're really good. They started eating them, and they went, wow, Well, if you look at the pattern of butternuts in Canada, what you see is they follow the rivers. Why? Because as the Anishinaabe would follow the rivers, they were hunter and gatherers and the Crees, they would plant them at every campsite that they have. So you see these tails going north along those old trails where the Anishinaabe and Cree planted those trees wherever they stopped. And get you back to the scientist again. Lake Temiskaming is way up north, and it's the farthest north you can find butternuts. And I was talking to the forester there and the biologist that found them. If you look at this area, the lake comes up, and at the north end of the lake there's a valley. And deep in that valley is where you find butternuts. And his comment was, isn't it amazing how the squirrels could move those nuts all the way up here, way south of the lake to this little wee valley, and they knew to plant the butternuts there. And we just, me and an Anishinaabe guy that were there, we just sort of went, what's wrong with this man, to get him there, that squirrel's gonna have to be a really amazing squirrel. But for people to move them, so if you look at the book, Trees of Canada, you'll see a line in the book, Trees of Canada, that says the natural extent of butternut in Canada. Well, there wasn't nothing natural about it. It was the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, moving those nuts and modifying the landscape that we had in order that we would have the diversity that we needed in order to sustain and makes our lives better. So when I look at things when people are saying biodiversity, we really got to protect that. Well, the first thing I say to them, well, where do you find this great, best biodiversity? Oh, in the parks. Well, we helped you set those up, so we helped you with biodiversity. Where else do you find them? Oh, it's funny, but you find it on Indian reserves too, because they have all that undeveloped land. At Akwesasne, we have thousands of hectares of undeveloped land. Just so happens that they produce medicines, they produce everything that the community could need. So why would we develop them? They're already developed. They're producing the things that our people need to have. And when you look in, the best one I've seen is if you get a Landsat photograph of southern Ontario, what you'll see is that right smack dab in the middle of southern Ontario is a block. That's right there. It's obvious. And when you look at the block carefully, you see in that block that there's old growth Carolinian forest, which is different from the forests around. And that block is Six Nations Indian Reserve. And why is that block there? Because it's undeveloped land. Well, our people utilize the land for what we need, and we keep it wild because of the medicines and other things we need. So the last thing I would say that about this type of thing is when we talk about species at risk and where we find some of these species at risk, you find a lot of them on Indian reserves. In the Okanagan Valley, for example, many of the plants that have been disappearing over the years, like the last 500 years, you can only find on native reserves. Why? Because the medicine people are the ones that preserve them and keep them. So, I look at this book and I say, how come I'm not in there? How come my grandmother isn't in there? Who's, probably be the best scientist on eastern box turtle and probably butternuts and a lot of other time. How come she's not represented in here and I don't see her happy face on the front? And that's a problem because the scientists believe that they understand the worlds around them, but they don't have the deep knowledge that Native people have by living on the land. And so it's one of those things that I think is a downfall that we have with the Biodiversity Convention. Even though it says that Native people should be involved and taking part and doing that, what you find is that they're really anxious about working with us on knowledge. And so it's one of those places that I hate to say it this way, but when they first arrived in this country, we extended the hand of friendship to them because we said, my great-grandmother was the good one. She said her and her great-grandmother saw the first non-natives coming into southern Ontario. And her comment was always really good. I loved listening to her talk about it. She says, "Oh, Henry, they were pitiful people, very pitiful. They had traveled long distance, and their skin was all white. You know, it wasn't nice. They never hardly go in the sun, and they didn't bathe much. It was terrible, and they didn't even know what to eat. You know, they would go out and they would bite things, and they get sick because they bite the wrong things." And I said, "Grandma, what did we do? What did you do for them?" "Oh, well, we had to teach them. We had to teach them how to live on the land and what we did." Because in her mind, those were people. Those were people like our people. And so as a woman and as that person, we have to help. We have to teach them. If they don't know how to use something, then we have to show them. And that we believed, or she believed, that teaching was reciprocal. So they would teach us things and we would teach them things. Now, it wasn't as so reciprocal as it was, but again, I think we're coming to a point where our people, again, have to put that hand out. And it's our people that are going to have to be telling them the stories of our animals and the biodiversity that exists in all of our lands. Again, there are people in this world that are thinking in that direction, that are saying, how do we help the non-natives see that they're an integrated species in the world? And if they're an integrated species in the world and their habitat is threatened, then they should be really concerned about this, far more concerned about this than any dollar amount that you could find. So again, I think there are some gross, like I said, I feel like I was a failure when today I read this for about the third or fourth time that I sang it, and I came away and I was telling Curtis, I said, "Oh man, I'm going to have to go in there and tell these people, guys, I've worked all my life, 40 years on this stuff, and I hate to say this, but I failed. There's nothing I can see that in that book that we've really accomplished," until I read this one. And I think you got some of the people coming. Yeah, and when I read this one, I said, there's good work out there. Might be pretty quiet, and people might not know about it, but it's the type of thing that our people should be shouting from the rooftops. And we should be talking to them and saying, how do we make it known more about what our original instructions are and how we live by them? So I'm going to give you a problem that I see developing among Native people, and I call it intellectual welfare. And intellectual welfare is much like welfare. They give you money in order to support you, and that's going to help you and do so. Well, welfare, what it does is it robs the identity and robs your spirit as you live longer and longer on that. And you see that occurring within the non-native population in our own. Intellectual welfare is when they give their ideas to us and say, these are the best ideas. And our people go, oh, well, maybe I'm too lazy to think of our own way of doing things. Oh, so we'll take this. Where I see it happening in Canada is on elected band councils, which I work for. And what they do is the government comes in and says, this is the way you treat people. It's called the personnel policy for the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. And the intellectual welfare is they just grab it and they go, oh, bright and shiny. Look, it's got a nice cover. Oh, look at hundreds of pages. And they take that in and say, we will now apply this because we are modern and we want to do the best thing. Oh, and by the way, it was written by Brown College or some business school, and so it must be right. Instead of sitting down and thinking about the terms and the policies that we had for treating each other. And every nation has them. And yet they don't sit down. They take that welfare and they bring it into themselves. whether it's personnel policy or it's economic drivers. Our department also works with the Department of Economic Development. They're a strange bunch of people, man. You know, they're the only people in the world that I know that believe that you know, the world runs on magic. You know, nothing is connected to the soil, and as long as you have $1, you're okay. Wow, that's pretty powerful stuff. But that's another form of intellectual welfare that we want to absorb. That by making a lot of money, we're going to have a lot of stuff, and it's all going to be good. Well, we see from the casinos and the things that have happened in Indian country that sometimes that's not the right thing to happen. So how do we convince them that our own people, that this intellectual welfare is not the way to go? The best one I have right now at Akwesasne is that we have people in our marsh areas that are saying, we want to harden the shoreline. You know, put metal pylons in. Put the grass right to the shore. Because we want to look just like those people, those white people across the road that do exactly the same thing. They go right to the shore. 2 days later, the guy comes back into our office and says, hey, I can't see any minnows. Where did all my minnows go? Well, you harden the shoreline. Before, you used to have weeds and things and grasses and everything growing, which the minnows love. Now you've got a sterile environment out there, and not a minnow, you know, would live there for $1,000. It's not going to stay there. Well, I need minnows, so where am I going to get them? Well, tear out all that shoreline stuff and put the old stuff back in again, and you'll have all your minnows back. Because intellectual welfare says, oh, I want to look like them, so I'll adopt what they do and make it my own as the welfare because I don't have to think about it. But when doing that, we end up destroying the biodiversity that we so well cherish by our people. And some of our people are taking that welfare and saying, how we want to live like that. We want to do that. And so I think that's what we need. Bob's here. He works again with us and the youth and elders, Thompson Island Youth and Elders Camp, which again, we try to bring those values back and show kids who, some of our kids too, you know, are on that Nintendo generation, you know. Oh yes, look, I caught a fish, you know. I can't understand that, you know. It's more like that catches a fish, you know, not sitting there with a stick. So how do we get them away from that and get them back into the environment in order to marvel at the beauty that they see around them? And Bob is one of the people that does that work for us. Peggy is one of the people, and her husband with them, is that one of our masters for fishing, and she is I think one of the best botanists I know, so I hope you speak to them. Curtis works with us. He's our environmental assessment person. And we do environmental assessments on all projects in Akwesasne, but we use our own framework. So we use the words that come before all else to determine whether a project should go ahead. And I can remember Indian Affairs one time when we submitted it to them, the official went, so where's the traditional knowledge of your people in this framework? It's all the way through? Oh no, we wanted it separated off into this little box over here so we could see that you're actually using traditional knowledge. I said, okay, well, come down and we'll have a meeting with you. Okay, he said, that's fine. Well, so he came down. We went into the boardroom. One of us got up, gave the greetings and Thanksgiving address that you heard, and talked about it. We also talked in English what the meetings were and what we were saying. And this guy's sitting there going, and he's looking at the framework that we use for the environmental assessment. And he goes, Henry, it's all the way through your thing. I said, shh, don't tell anybody. Don't need that. You know, even when you put it in front of their faces, sometimes they can't see it. And so I think we have to some ways treat them like children and help them along to see this. And as any grandmother will tell you, that you do that with respect, you do that with love, and you do that with the good words and the good mind that our people can generate. So I leave that with you. I don't think like I said, I might read this book again in more detail and see if I can find a few places where we've done stuff. But I'll read this with joy in order to know that there are many, many other people out there working on exactly the same thing. So in closing, what I would say to you is that the day that all human beings upon this world declare ourselves as part of biodiversity and the animals that live out there, that will be the day that we'll have succeeded in integrating biodiversity conservation in all of our lives. And do I see that coming? I probably won't be here. But I think my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and those 7 generations to come will see it. And so I have hope for the world around us. And the conventions that we see coming up, where Native people and Aboriginal people, Indigenous people across the world are being brought forward and saying, help us. We don't understand. How do we do that? I think we have a really unique place in this, and our voices should be heard loud and clear. So I think we've got some hope out there.
Just wanted to thank you, and thank you for having us on your territory. And I just wanted to say that you touched me and you lit off some light bulbs in my head too, and in my heart, because right now we're fighting LNG in our territory. They want to bring their gifts to us, they say. But, and then you were talking about that we did lend them our land in our territory, and it's unceded land. So now what we're doing is we're trying to form a group of young people, young warriors, and we're going to go and actually live on that land where they want to do their LNG business. So, but the thing is, we're fighting our own people, and it's sad. It is.
Well, remember what I said about that, about welfare, intellectual welfare.
Yeah.
What happens to a community when you put 4 people on welfare? We'll say 4. Right away, everybody go, oh, look at those people. They don't even have to work, and they're getting money. Suddenly, there's tension.
Yeah.
And suddenly, you see that tension in your community. Whereas if you're all poor together, it sounds funny, and you're working to make food, to get ooligan oil, to get whatever, everybody goes, yeah, let's work, let's get it done. And then we'll feast tonight and we'll have a great time. But this welfare stuff seems to divide us. And we then start looking over the fence to see how much that guy's got or how much this one's got. And intellectual welfare does exactly the same thing. You know, our people, and I work for a band council, right? So what do we say? Oh, elections have to be the way that the white people do them, because that's the right way to do it. Really? You know, 1/3, what did they say? 1 person in 5 in Canada, voting people in Canada and the United States vote for the majority party. 1 person in 5. So that's a democracy. When 1/50 are people that can vote elect the whole government, that's not a democracy, that's a tyranny. And the other side is, who do we cut out? Oh, you're under 18 or under 21. You don't have a brain, you can't vote. In our society, everyone talked about the elections, the condolence of chiefs. Even the kids would talk about it. And they would come to consensus and say how they would be. Show me where that system is wrong. But I can show you that by extending that intellectual welfare of democracy and those type of things, suddenly everybody's at each other's throats and there's not happiness there. So if there's anything that I say to you is that be on the guard for that intellectual welfare. The second one is it's tough to go back to your own ways. So we have the great way of peace. We talked about the Thanksgiving address, which you've heard, and it's there. that gives you a framework in which you compare and see if your project's good. But you have also we call it the words that come before all else, or not word, I mean the great way of peace. My grandmother used to translate it as the way to be nice. And she said by following that way to be nice, it showed us how to work together. Well, God, and you can translate it into 3 words. So even a little one this big can say the 3 words back to you and know if they're doing it the right way or not. But I think sometimes it's just too simple. We need 36 lawyers to write the whole thing. It'll probably be 80 volumes of it. But we wrote it so that any person could understand it. I was told it when I was tiny, and I've taken 65, 70 years of my life now trying to figure out how it works. That's okay. I may have a couple more years to figure out. Great, I'll keep passing that knowledge on and we'll get stronger because of it. So intellectual welfare I see as one of those things that our people, it's nice and shiny, just like those things in the past. Ooh, I want that. And suddenly you forgot who you are. So thank you very much for that. I think it's important, a thing for all of us to remember.